When they send you to a psych ward, they mean business. They told me, you shut your mouth or we're going to say you're crazy. Now,
Carl Mollnow is a former Air Force pilot and reserve officer in the Military Airlift Command who claims military psychiatry was used in an effort to shut him up and eventually to get rid of him after 18 years. And why would the Air Force want to get rid of him? According to Mollnow, because of a series of flight safety reports he submitted.
Maybe I shouldn't have said anything, but I still feel I did the right thing.
It's 840,000 square miles, 4 times the size of Texas. And it's got enough ice to stock every bar in Texas for the next 10,000 years, with enough left over to turn Saudi Arabia into a swamp. When you get in a helicopter and fly around some of these icebergs, you remember the old cliche about the tip of the iceberg. What we flew around is presumably 1/8 of what's below the surface. This berg was about 60 feet high. If the cliche is right, that means there's about 400 feet more of it under the water. Unless you were lucky enough to be stationed here during World War II, or were part of the missile defense building boom of the 50s, this is probably the first time you've ever laid eyes on the place. And it's probably the last time you'll want to.
Your people, they knew better, but they don't want to say that we had romances, same as anybody else. So, they never had a love song in a colored show. You couldn't stand up and sing, "Oh, darling, I love you."
Never. I had to always put on an Aunt Jemima dress, and so did Ethel Waters. Ethel Waters and I had to put on Aunt Jemima clothes.
I'm Mike Wallace.
I'm Willie Safer.
I'm Harry Reasoner.
I'm Ed Bradley. Those stories and more tonight on 60 Minutes. One thing we don't do in this country is send our dissidents to mental hospitals as they do in the Soviet Union. But 2 military officers say that's exactly what happened to them when they ran afoul of their superiors. The 2 officers, one Air Force and one Navy, were not subjected to drugs and were not physically abused. But they were kept in locked mental wards even though no psychiatric illness or mental disease was ever diagnosed. After each was released, his military career was abruptly ended. Psychiatrists in and out of the service say that when things like that happen, they happen because military psychiatrists operate under different rules from civilian psychiatrists. And because when the military is involved, the interests of the service can, and sometimes do, override the rights of the individual.
When they send you to a psych ward, they mean business. They told me, you shut your mouth or we're going to say you're crazy. Now,
Carl Mollnow is a former Air Force pilot and reserve officer in the Military Airlift Command who claims military psychiatry was used in an effort to shut him up and eventually to get rid of him after 18 years. And why would the Air Force want to get rid of him? According to Mollnow, because of a series of flight safety reports he submitted.
maybe I shouldn't have said anything, but I still feel I did the right thing.
Mollnow won his wings the hard way, up through the ranks from Air Force mechanic to graduation from Aviation Cadet School in 1961. He flew for the Strategic Air Command, then the Military Airlift Command. Even as a reservist, it was his full-time job. But the problem was Mollnow's concern about flight safety. His father had died in a plane crash, and Mollnow constantly submitted hazard reports, reports that sometimes embarrassed commanding officers. In 1974, he says he got the word from his commanding officer.
When you come back, I want to see your reports, and I want to see blank paper. All I want to see is a few numbers of the aircraft and blank paper. That's it, and your name on the end of it. I don't want to see anything else. And, well, I didn't do that.
Mollnow persisted with warnings about crew inexperience and flight fatigue on the long C-141 missions. In fact, in one report, he even suggested the possibility of a C-141 crashing into the Olympic Mountains on the dangerous approach to McChord Air Force Base in Tacoma, Washington. And a few years later, that's exactly what happened. The date was March 20th, 1975. Mach 40641 was bound from Yokota, Japan to McChord on final approach. We are in an Air Force simulator, but this is the actual control tower tape from that fatal night. As instructed, the weary crew descended to 5,000 feet.
Where's Mac 4064? Shoot, I forgot to ship tape. Stand by. Where is he, though?
Where was he? Mac 40641 had descended into the rugged Olympics and slammed directly into a 7,500-foot ridge. 10 crew members and 6 passengers died in the crash. The initial investigation blamed the controller. It turned out later that the crew was inexperienced, that they had had no real sleep in nearly 30 hours, that there was no map in the cockpit that indicated the altitude of the mountains. All problems that Carl Mollnow had pointed out in a flight hazard report nearly 5 years earlier.
Sure, the controller started the chain of events, but the chain of events was due to lack of training, lack of crew discipline, lack of paying attention.
Mollnow says the Air Force ignored all his hazard reports, and when he kept submitting them, he says he was grounded and ordered to undergo a psychiatric examination.
What was your reaction?
Anger. I was angry at the time because I knew that they were just trying to get rid of me, and for them to ground me and say they're going to send me to a psychiatrist, I could see their handwriting on the wall then, and it angered me. But I knew that I had to play it cool and stay cool, or they would have good reason. So what I did is I just went along with it.
Dr. Peter Bragan is a psychiatrist who runs the Center for the Study of Psychiatry in Washington, D.C. He's testified before Congress that psychiatric referrals in the military and the federal government are sometimes used to punish people who simply have personality conflicts or disagreements with their superiors. Too often, he says, there's no choice. You're ordered to see the psychiatrist.
And the pressures on you to go are so strong because you don't want to look like you're a kook who's avoiding it. In my experience, the mere fact that someone has thought you should see a psychiatrist puts a blotch on your record. And of course, if you've been asked to see a psychiatrist by your own supervisor, everybody knows what that means. People think you're crazy.
Not so, says Rear Admiral Harold Voth, a Navy Reserve psychiatrist speaking for the Department of Defense. Neither Voth nor the Defense Department would discuss Mollnow's charges because he's filed a lawsuit against his former commanding officers. The Admiral did agree to discuss military psychiatric referrals in general.
Such an exam, then, isn't an automatic red flag?
No. Oh, no. Listen, their pilots return to duty. I've known of pilots that have had a transient episode of anxiety, commonly called fear of flying. They've overcome that, gone back to duty, and have functioned well. I can't conceive of in our enlightened age, this happening to a person.
But Mollnow says it did happen to him, even though he was considered a first-class pilot, even superior, a flight instructor in the MAC system. His evaluation reports consistently showed excellent performance ratings. Only 6 months before he was grounded, his wing commander described Mollnow as outstanding and went on to write he should be promoted ahead of his contemporaries. But the very week that the Air Force plane crashed into the Olympic Mountains, Mollnow was undergoing a psychiatric examination at nearby Madigan Army Hospital. His doctor was Colonel George Mitchell, the chief psychiatrist. After 3 weeks of tests, Dr. Mitchell concluded no diagnosis indicated. In other words, no problems. But within a few days, Lieutenant Colonel William Dyer, head of McCord's Medical Services, wrote this official letter to another Air Force psychiatrist. The letter appears to request that the psychiatrist find reason to remove Mollnow from the Air Force, even though he had already been cleared by Dr. Mitchell. It goes on to say that command is intensely interested in the case, and it named 2 generals and 4 colonels involved in what it said had become a political football. It ended with the comment, "I hope you can help us." Lieutenant Colonel Dyer declined to discuss the letter. Colonel Mitchell, whose examination was rejected by the Air Force, died in 1977.
They're saying, hey, get rid of this guy. We've tried all the ways we can to get rid of him. We can't court-martial him because we have nothing to court-martialing him on. We can't give him a flying evaluation board, which is an FEB, saying he's a crummy pilot because he's an outstanding pilot. We even said it ourselves. So we're trying to find some psychological thing that may be wrong with him.
So here they have this individual they want to get rid of, They want to get rid of him for political reasons. They're afraid to get rid of him for political reasons. In other words, they're saying, give us a medical diagnosis, parentheses, if you can, that will help us get rid of this person. Well, they send them then to a psychiatrist, and who does the psychiatrist work for? Well, he works for the same organization. So what is he likely to say?
Get rid of it.
Get rid of him.
Mollnow discovered the letter after the Air Force had arranged a second psychiatric examination. He decided not to see another psychiatrist. But because he was in the reserves, the Air Force simply ignored him, stopped calling him for flight duty. With no income, Mollnow waged his battle for vindication at home for nearly 2.5 years, writing senators, congressmen, the Air Force. Nothing happened. Out of frustration, he says, and in an effort to get the Air Force to listen to him, he did something which even he now believes hurt his cause. He returned a routine personnel form with obscene, even sick comments scrawled on it.
This is pretty rough stuff, Carl.
It is, yeah.
I mean, it's clearly, some of it is obscene. I
Yes,
guess
it is.
about the best you can say for it.
It is.
You said that General Lyon, well, I guess I can't read that on television. And you go on to say, well, I'd have to delete that too. I mean, Carl, anyone reading this would say, this guy's off.
I know it's a negative way to get their attention. They're going to be angry, but they want to get rid of me in the first place. So I'm not doing anything more than just getting their attention. I'm not ashamed of anything I did. That letter, I'm not ashamed of that letter. I feel that at the time, it's the only thing I could think of.